Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and welcome to today's upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button. Takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that like button. And folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? Alright, so for the last 2018 I started this channel. So for the last 7 years I have had encounters shared with me that still kind of bother me when I think about them. And one of those is Jesse's, Kirk, and a couple of others, Brad. Now, last night I had an opportunity to speak with a husband and wife, Kyle and Sadie, and their experience really truly is haunting. And I don't like comparing videos, especially ones where there is so much trauma. But this is right there with Jesse's. And it is truly a tragic case as a parent and as a parent or father of a daughter. It made it really hard to talk with both of these individuals. So let's jump into it. All right, so I'm going to briefly set the scene and the region for you. 1981, Whittier, North Carolina, which is Swain County. There's a chunk of land that is it almost resembles a peninsula, I guess. It's surrounded by two rivers, and at the tip of it is it connects into one river, the Tuckasegee River, and on the opposite side is the Oconaluftee River. Now, they both connect into the Tuckasegee, and there's actually, their residence was just kind of east of the Oconaluftee River, or Oconaluftee Lake, which, the now lake. So back in 81, there was at one point one road that ran through this region and a couple of dirt roads. Their house that they had bought back in 81, in this square mileage, probably in a 10 square mile radius, there was like 4, maybe 6 houses on this little chunk of land. The majority of Whittier is kind of south across the Tuckasegee River. Now, it's a small rural population. It was even smaller then. If you lived in that area at one point, if you ever lived in that area in 1981, you will remember the news. 2 children drowned, and there was an extensive investigation. The media made it seem like the parents were at fault, but they were not ever once at fault. Unlike Jesse's case, when Jesse and his wife were questioned, threatened, put in custody, and, just put right through the ringer. Kyle and his wife Sadie they were questioned briefly in the regards of what had occurred. And then at that point, there was some manipulation done, but never once were they threatened. And when Kyle had heard Jesse's experience, he had contemplated on sharing their experience with us. His wife was the one, Sadie was the one that introduced him to the channel. She's been listening to the channel for about 3 years now. And Kyle just started to listening about 1.5 years ago. So he was fairly new to the channel when I shared Jesse's experience. Now, difference between Jesse's and Sadie and Kyle's is not only did their child pass away, but Kyle's brother did as well, his young brother. And this is honestly a nightmare for any family. All right, so the layout is kind of laid out for you. At the time, Kyle was 25 years old. Sadie was 26. They had been together for about seven years at that point. A year after they met, they had a daughter named Krista, who at the point is 6 years old. So they met each other 7 years prior, had a daughter about a year after they had met. Now, Kyle is from Gatlinburg, and Sadie is from Bryson City, which is right in that region. After they had met, Sadie's dad owned a business in that area at one point and had hired Kyle to work with him. She is one of 2 daughters, and the other daughter's husband also worked with Sadie's and her sister's father's business. So family business, life was good, life was great. They purchased this little home, little plot of land. Not a little plot of land. They actually had about 3.5 acres of land. And in 81, practically a brand new house. It was a house that was built by someone not from the area. It was kind of like their summer home at one point. Because of where this is located, you are on 2 rivers practically. Beautiful area. But you have Nantahala to the south and the Great Smokies to the north. And Swain County from Bryson City or Whittier north is just woods, mountains, densely forested area. But that's nothing they're thinking of at this point, you know. They start their family with their daughter, buy their house, and on occasion, Kyle would have his little brother, his youngest brother, come down, who in 81, mind you, this is 1981, the brother was 14, and apparently Kyle's dad was big into kind of movies, westerns and stuff, and Ronald Reagan was a actor, and his brother's name was Reagan after Ronald Reagan. So Reagan was 14, 1981, and he would drive up and pick his little brother up. There wasn't a lot for him to do at their home. Kyle's mom and dad were getting up in age, and he was almost like a surprise baby for the family. So, you know, being a good older brother, that's what he would do. He would bring him down and give him a chance to, you know, have a decent summer, decent days, whatnot, and swimming and whatnot. So life was good. Sadie being from this area, Kyle had never heard or had seen any kind of, he had heard of Bigfoot. Everybody's heard of Bigfoot. You've heard of UFOs. You know, no matter where you live in the United States or, you know, any country at that. But growing up where he grew up, there was nobody seeing a Bigfoot. Nobody he knew saw anything like that. It was not something even, just not even mentioned. But Sadie, growing up in this area, and her family's property is to the west of Whittier, still in Bryson City, but I guess her family's property was just immense. Her mom and dad were fairly well off. They had about 20 acres of land, and about half of that was just undeveloped woods, you know, 10 acres of just, and then the other 10 acres was their home. They had a pond on there. Beautiful layout, and their business. The business was on there. He did not want to share the one. It's not a business anymore, but there's just certain things that he didn't want to share, just privacy of their families, and I can't blame them. So this is the beginning of summer 1981. School had just gotten out. It was mid-June, and the agreement was Kyle would go and pick up his little brother. His mom and dad were going to go on some sort of vacation, and Kyle he said, I really didn't get along with my parents too much during, you know, after I had aged out of living at their home. And that's the exact word, aged out of living. So you can tell what kind of relationship he had with his mom and dad. But if he could be that role model for his parents, and they were older, you know, they were much older. Like I said, 14-year-old for a couple that had, you know, Kyle had been out of the house a good 5 years by the time they even had Reagan, and he was the youngest. So he's got 2 older brothers. So they were in their 60s. I think his dad was in his 60s. His mom was in his like early 40s, and it was one of those where don't have the kid, or possibly you might, you may have some kind of difficulties. And there were difficulties with Reagan. He either had autism or Asperger's, and that wasn't a thing back then, in 81, like it is now. They just pretty much said, he's got issues. He's got some problems. Especially, and I'm not downing any area, but, rural South, even in New York at that point, no matter where you were in the country, these things were not what they are. The approach to it was not what it is now. But he was very introverted. He was very, kind of right in his shell. He would draw a lot when he was at his parents' home. He would isolate himself. But when he got to Kyle and Sadie's house, it was a whole different kind of ball game. He had free reign. He was able to, go for a walk on the dirt road that they lived on, and the dirt road they had or lived on at the time. Like I said, there was one paved road that ran through this little region. And so it ran right to the Oconaluftee River. And so he had permission to walk to the river. He knew the dangers of water, and not to go into the water, not to do anything that could jeopardize his safety. And I guess the summer before he was 13, Krista would have been 5. They trusted him to babysit and go for walks with her, because one, you're in a very small community, a very tight-knit community. There's only 6 houses max in this little kind of area here, and one main road. So he wasn't responsible, but he wasn't responsible for her, but they gave him kind of like a little bit of responsibility. Here, hang out, with your niece, and we'll pay you if you want to watch her for an hour for us while we do laundry. They wouldn't go to a store, or they wouldn't go to the movies, but they were at home. And if there was something they needed to do, would you like to, make a few bucks to watch your niece? And, so that summer prior to, they had entrusted him with that responsibility. So it wasn't a new thing for him to walk with Krista and just, hang out and keep an eye on her. So on this one evening, I guess Reagan had gone to the back side of their home and walked to the Tuckasegee side there. And he was looking, there's just a little bit of rapids in this one area, and he was down there looking at the water, and that had scared him enough to where he didn't want to go down there anymore. So he had gone home. He had gone back to Kyle and Sadie's house and said, I'm going to go up to the other side, and because the water moves fast down there and I don't like it and it's loud, so I'm going to go up by, the now lake, the Oconaluftee Lake, but it wasn't at that point. And so they were like, okay, have fun, come back right before dark. They had given him a watch, and it was, Kyle will never forget, because this was the last gift he had gotten his little brother. He had finished his 6th grade year for school and came down. Kyle had bought him a watch that had AM FM radio in it, and it was from Radio Shack. You could put headphones in and plug it into your watch and listen to a ball game or whatever crappy AM station you would get, but it was something cool. I remember those watches. I remember the calculator watches. So the second he said that, I remembered that. And then, the Radio Shack, I hadn't heard of Radio Shack in so long. So, it was just a really nostalgic thing right there. Also in 81, I was 5, so this is my era as well. So his daughter was older than me by a year. So, he said, come back before it's dark or no later than 6:30 or 7 o'clock by the latest. And sure enough, at around 6:50, that night he comes walking in the door, and he's kind of got a smile on his face, and he's not excited, but he's just got there's something off to him. He's got a smile on his face. He's kind of isolating a little bit, not talking as much, and they had went looking for him because Kyle had seen him and said something to his wife about how he had a big smile on his face, but he didn't really want to say anything. I said, thanks for coming home on time, and they went into the living room, and he was kind of in a corner playing with his toys, just not watching any kind of TV or just playing with he played with action figures still at 14, but once again he had parents that really didn't care all that much, and I stated that just how Kyle said, when I aged out of living at my parents' house. So, he didn't have that. Also with autism or Asperger's, so he didn't have any of the help or understanding, but had a great older brother who really truly loved him, and had actually thought about him and his wife had thought about talking to his parents about having Reagan move in, not adopting him, but just having him move in and giving his parents, coming up with like, you need a break, but we'll take him, we'll take him off your hands to give you guys a break. But it was more or less to give Reagan a little better of a life, to where he could get the attention and stuff that he needed. So they go in and he remembers hearing him talking about something that was off, and he kept saying, something's scared, too big, but he's playing it out with his action figures. So he hears him playing, with his action figures, and he's almost playing it out of what he saw. And Kyle recognized that quickly. He knew that his brother there was something wrong. Immediately he knew. And he sat down, and he said, are you okay? And his brother looked up at him, Reagan looked up at him and said, yes, I don't want to go. I don't want to go to the water anymore. He goes, it's too loud and too fast one way, and monsters are on the other side, the other way. And he kind of looked at him and he's like, monsters? He had already knew what he meant by, fast and loud, with the water, moving a little quicker on the Tuckasegee River on that side. But on the opposite side, he's like, monsters, like there's really nothing on that side at this point. There's, this is 40 years ago. It wasn't even built up at that point. There was very little. Almost woods right up to the river. And he said, what do you mean monsters, bud? Did you see a bear? Did you see, what did you see? Was it a person? And he just shook his head, and he took one of the action figures that he was playing with and showed it to Kyle and said, like him, but no shield and no any kind of armor. Like him, but no armor. And brown and black. And he's like, all right. And he was playing with, these larger action figures. Later to find out that it was He-Man action figures that he was playing with. And the action figure that he had was red or an orange color, which was Beastman. And he's, like there was only like 4 action figures out at the time, I think. Very little. And he's, just shaking it around, and, brown and black and bigger, and no weapons or no armor. And so he's like, huh. And you're like, all right. And he walks and talks to his wife in the kitchen, and he said, I think he saw a bear. He said, over on the Oconaluftee side. He said it was across the river. And, because this is exactly, he repeated kind of exactly word for word what Reagan had said to him. And he said, I'm going to take a walk. He said, do you mind if I just, take a walk down there? He goes, I want to see what's bothering him. He goes, because he doesn't act like that here. He'll act, he isolates and is very quiet at his own home. but not here. This is a whole, and he isolates a lot at his parents' house because, they fight and they're older and, they don't pay attention to him. So it's out of the norm for him at Kyle and Sadie's house. And she's like, yeah, just be careful. And he's like, I will. And he's like, I went in my room and he said I had a .357 revolver. He said I grabbed it just in case. He said, and I took a walk. He said it's only about 1/8 of a mile, if that, from my driveway to where the river is. He's like, so I'm walking and I'm thinking about what he could possibly have seen. And he said, I get to like maybe 200 feet from the opening of this dirt road. It's the opening to where, you can see the river. Not a beach, but it's just like an opening where you can stand and fish and walk into the river. And he's like, and I hear the woods on the right of me. I hear something in the woods, something cracking sticks. And he said, and I think to myself, that's a lot bigger than a raccoon, a possum. He said, a dog. He said, that's whatever's right there. It's pretty big. And he kind of stops for a second and looks over that way. And he's scanning and he doesn't see anything. He's like, all right. And he kind of just keeps walking, but he's keeping an ear on that side of the road. And he gets to where the opening is so he can look into the river, and he's looking across and he's trying to see as far as he can. It's getting darker now. He's got a crappy old flashlight with him. He turns on and it's that yellow, even the largest of battery powered light bulb or flashlights back then were just absolutely garbage. So, he's like, I light my flashlight and I'm looking and I'm trying to see if there's any movement. He said, and I've already forgotten about whatever was, kicking up sticks in the woods. He goes, because it didn't sound too dangerous. He's like, especially on where we live. I've lived here for 6 years practically. We bought this land and house when our daughter was not even, my wife was still pregnant for her, and I've never seen anything larger than a raccoon, in this area. Once in a while a deer, but nothing predatory. So he kind of stops and looks around again. And as he's kind of scanning the woods, he stops because there's something that caught his eye, and it was an orangish color, about 6.5 feet off the ground. And then there's a one to join it, same height, only about 5 inches away, 5 inches apart. And he's looking and he's like, what in the hell? And he thinks fireflies, because once again, nothing. And there's no growling, there's nothing. He's like, I don't know. And he doesn't even have a sense of dread. He said, if I had gotten a sense of dread, or if this thing had growled, he said, the kids would still be here. He said, but nothing. There was no dread. There was no other noise. There was just quiet. So he gets home because, there was just nothing nothing off, minus the sticks, but him not thinking that, there's going to be a luminous eye shine of some sorts in the woods. So he lets Sadie know what he saw, and he goes and talks to his brother, and he says, Reagan, I don't know what you saw. He said, are you sure? Are you sure it wasn't a bear, bud? Because I went down there, and when he said I went down there to look, his little brother's eyes got as big as saucers, like the fear. And, he said, well, don't worry about it. You don't have to go back there. You're all right. You're safe. Don't worry about it, bud. And a little time goes by. We put the kids to bed. And he and his wife are watching a little bit of TV before they go to bed because he's got work the next morning. And, he starts talking to his wife about it. And, they nothing out of the ordinary comes to mind. Next morning, he gets up and he thinks about it. And he's like, you know what? It's daytime now. I'm going to pop down there real quick. I'm going to jump out and look and maybe see if I can see any tracks or something. He's like, and then I'll just barrel out of there and head to work. So gets up, does it, drives down. There's nothing out of the ordinary. He gets out of his vehicle. He looks down by the water. He looks over to the sides. He walks up to the right-hand side wood line, kind of looks in there, waiting to hear something. Nothing out of the ordinary. Drives to work. So he's at work, and he kind of thinks about it a little bit throughout the day, but lets it go. Around lunchtime or whenever, he's talking to his father-in-law, and Reagan's a huge part of the family. Like I said, like he is practically his brother's, next child or another child to him. He loves him, and so does Sadie and Sadie's family. So he asks about, the father-in-law asks about Reagan and asks about Krista and, how are the kids and, how's he doing, this and that, because he's only, been there for a couple of days. And he explains, he said, well, last night, he said it was kind of weird because he went down to the Tuckasegee side, and he said it was startled him being loud and kind of fast on that one side where he was. He said, but, then he went to the Oconaluftee. He said he came back and he was just isolated and, really introverted. He didn't want to be talked to. He didn't, but he said he saw a monster. He said he saw something and he said he was scared. He was legitimately terrified. And I couldn't, for the life of me, figure it out. What he had possibly seen. And something, brings up Bigfoot. Because Kyle's like, have you ever seen a bear? He said, I know we've got them up in the Great Smokies and north of here. He said, and down in Nantahala. He said, but all this time, I've never seen a bear. He said, and he's adamant that he saw some sort of large monster. He said, I went down there. He said, a little bit after, he said, it was dark. It was getting dark. He said, I heard some sticks breaking in the woods. He said, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. And, he once again just kind of said, well, maybe you saw a Bigfoot or something like that. And he kind of looks at his father-in-law like he's got 3 heads, because he's never heard. Obviously he's heard of them, but growing up where he grew up, it was nothing to think about like that. And so he goes home, day's over, he goes home and he asks his wife how everything was and this and that. And sure enough, Reagan was fine. But he didn't leave the house. He had played in the yard for a little bit with Krista, and he said, well, your father said something about a freaking Bigfoot. And she kind of turned her head to him and said, I didn't think about that. She said, growing up, people talk about him all the time to the north of us and to, down south. She said, but I didn't think about that, maybe. And he's like, Sadie, come on now. Bigfoot, he probably saw a bear. And night goes off without a hitch. Everything's fine. Goes to work the next day. And nothing was brought up. Totally just normal day. Gets home, everything's fine. Reagan's a little bit back to his normal speed. I guess he had went outside that day a little bit, played outside by himself and with his niece, and was almost back to normal. I guess the best way to explain it would be. So he got home, still light out. It's about 6. Did a quick dinner, and they go outside. Krista and Reagan, and they're outside, and how their yard went. The backyard kind of was at there was kind of an angular part to their property, and almost part of the backyard seemed to be in the front or side. Is kind of a weird cut of the 3-acre piece of land that he had. And so he remembers popping his head out and looking just to see if they're okay, and because he's not thinking of it anymore. About 10-15 minutes go by, and he hears Reagan screaming, and he hears his daughter crying, but then he hears Reagan screaming still, and then the crying or whatnot stopped, but Reagan's still screaming, and he's in the living room, and his wife was in the kitchen, and they kind of both met at that side door of the house. And he sees Reagan running full speed toward the dirt road, and he's literally hauling ass, just running. And they both quickly get onto the kind of, it's not really an enclosed porch, but it was an open porch. It had a roof pad, a cement pad, and then some stairs. There wasn't even a screen. It was more like not even a deck, but a porch, an open porch, I guess you'd call it. And he gets out onto that, and he screams Reagan's name. And he's looking around for his daughter. He's looking all around, and Sadie's screaming, where is she? Because they both heard her crying for like a couple of seconds, like very, very different than his scream. It was just almost simultaneous. And he sees they both turn, and he starts to run after his brother. And Sadie said something. What the is that? It's got Krista. And he turns to look at her because he thinks that his daughter's, there. And he turns back to look, and he looks at his brother, and he kind of looks over because he's staring at his brother the whole time he was taking off after him. And he sees this just large brown kind of lump moving very quickly. And he sees it's dragging something. And it appears to be kind of running quadruped, but it's using one arm to drag something, and which would have been his daughter. The conversation got really really hard at this point. So he remembers running inside. His wife's yelling at him because he ran inside to get the 357 revolver, because the only thing he saw was this large animal or creature running with his daughter, being pretty much, she's getting dragged. It's got her leg in its hand, and it's, she's bouncing on the ground. And his little brother's chasing after this thing. He runs back outside, and he just starts sprinting. When he gets out of his yard and onto the road, he can't see his brother anymore. He can't see, and he just starts running for that direction that they were last seen at. He starts, it's an eighth of a mile from his house to where the Econolofty is. And he gets about halfway down the dirt road, and he starts to see these blood splotches on the ground. And he kind of stops and looks, and he yells both kids' names, and he doesn't hear anything. He hears what he thinks is like growls or some sort of animalistic sounds. And he runs more that way. He kind of is keeping an eye on the ground to where the splotches of blood would be, but they're few and far between. They're there, but they're And he gets to where he had been last night, and now between the last time he had seen his brother and his daughter, a good 2 minutes might have passed between the time he ran inside to get his pistol and then run back out and run. And he turns, and he's screaming, and and he hears this kind of just this god-awful bellow of pain, and nothing, like it's just this high-pitched bellow and screech and pain. And he runs towards where the noise is, and it's to the left of where he had been, into the woods. And there's a trail that goes just further into the woods, and it brings you to another piece of opening to the river, which would be a little closer to what now is a lake, where the rivers merged and then turned into one, which eventually it turns into the Tuckasegee. He sees his daughter's body on the ground, lifeless. And he stops, and he's in shock. He's crying. He picks her up and looks at her, holds her, feels her mouth, try to feel any kind of life. And he remembers feeling just the warmth of the blood. And he screams his little brother's name, because he can't see him. He's nowhere to be seen. And he kind of lays his daughter back down, because now he's like, all right, I don't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. I'm imagining that noise that I heard was, my brother. He said, I had a hard time putting her head down. He said, but I knew she was gone. He said, I wanted this to, so he said, I wanted to wake up from this. He said, it felt like it was a real dream, a real nightmare. And he starts to kind of look at that trail, and he could see shadows, movement. And he stops for a second, pulls his gun, holds it up to wait, because it almost looked like something was coming out of the small trail. We're talking very small piece of trail, couple 100 feet to another opening. So there's light, there's still canopy above you, but it's, and he realizes that nothing is coming. It's just shadows of movement. And he really cautiously walks. He starts to walk into the woods. He gets right to the trail beginning, and he hears this, just a cry and a scream that he never heard again. Never hopes to ever hear again from his wife, because now his wife had just found their daughter. And he turns and looks, and she's there holding their 6-year-old child. And he looks at her, and he realizes at this point, he said, I realized at this point, one thing that was holding me back, he said to Jeff, and I'm sorry, that sounds so bad. He said, but it wasn't fear. He said, I wasn't afraid. He said, because it was all happening so fast. He said, I just didn't want to leave my daughter by herself right there for that split second while I looked for my brother. He said, I loved both of them, He said, but it's my daughter. He said, I never will forget that feeling of pulling at my heart, because knew my brother needed me. He said, but I couldn't leave her. He said, so the second I saw Sadie with her, he said, I ran. He said, when I ran into that couple of 100 feet into the woods, he said, I heard these noises. He said, I heard a big splash. And I got to the clearing, and he said, I saw this thing like swimming almost like a missile through the water. He said, I couldn't see it. He's like, I'm looking for my brother. He said, I couldn't see it. Couldn't see him. And he said, I'm looking. He said, and I thought about shooting this thing. He said, I shot, maybe it had my brother underwater or something. He said, I took aim, and as I was right about to take a shot, he said, for some reason, he said, I just quick turned my head to look back at my wife and daughter. And he said, and as I did, he said, my eyes scanned just briefly. He said, to look back at her. He said that there was my brother laying in the woods, just a couple feet off the trail. He said, I don't know how I missed him when I ran by. He said, but he was there. He was pretty torn up. He said it looked like this thing tried to eat his soft tissue. He said he was gutted. And it looked like it almost tried to consume the internal organs of him. So I immediately just ran over to my little brother's body. He said, I knew he was dead. When I could see he was dead, he said, I stood back up and I ran back over to that clearing. He said, and I fired 2 shots at that thing. And I don't know if I hit it. He said, for some reason, I needed to take those 2 shots. He said, I don't know if it was 2 shots because of my daughter and my brother, or if it was just what I squeezed off. He said, so I ran back over and picked him up and carried him back to where my wife and my daughter's body was. He said, I laid him down next to her. He said, and I looked at my wife, and my wife is just on the ground, not comprehending a thing I'm saying. And he said, I gotta call the police. I gotta call the ambulance. I gotta call somebody. He said, I told my wife, we gotta bring him back to the house. We can't leave him right here. So he said, I picked my brother back up, and he said, I tried to pick my daughter up, but my wife kind of smacked my hand away, and she picked her up. And we walked down that road, that 1/8 of a mile, back to our house. He said, and we put him inside, and I called the police department. So I called, the state police came, and he said, one of the troopers that came in, he said, I knew from working, going into my father-in-law's business. And he said, and I explained what happened. And he said, I was for sure thinking this guy was going to think I was crazy. He said, I didn't realize I had my pistol in my hand the whole time. The whole time until they came, and he said, the one that I knew from my father-in-law's business, he said, he asked me to put it down. He said, I realized that I had it. He said, I put it down, and he said, I started to tell both responding troopers that showed up what happened, and I said, this isn't, it didn't happen in our yard. He said, they must have gotten my daughter in our yard. He said, but I don't know what happened. He said, I can't explain what happened. He said, it makes no sense to me. And my wife is just in shock. And he looks at the other trooper and says, contact county. We got to have county involved. And whoever is, going to make the determination and stuff of, they got to send it to the medical examiners. They got to send both bodies to the medical examiner's office and such. And there needs to be an autopsy done. Do that. I want to take a look at where this occurred. And he said during the walk, he said, I couldn't leave my wife. He said, I didn't want her to get grilled by that other trooper. And he said, the guy that I knew said, nothing, no one's going to mess with her. He said, we're not even going to talk about it right now. He said, I'm trying to talk to you. He said, you were the one that found both of them. He said, bring me. And he said, we came up to those splotches and, we came to where the trail system was, and I explained exactly how this is where I found her. This is what I heard. I walked in. I saw this thing in the woods or in the water. He said, I turned back to look at my wife and my daughter's body. He said, and sure enough, there's my brother just laying there in the woods. His shirt just shredded. And his chest and stomach kind of just, it looked like something had grabbed his throat and shook him. And the trooper said, listen, he said, I know what you're going to think. He said, but we've had reports of, something that is real big. And he said, Bigfoot? He said, I remember saying, Bigfoot? Are you seriously saying this to me now? He said, our Bigfoot? He said, because what I saw had a tail. He said, and that's when he cut me off, and he said, you need to listen. He said, I don't know what you saw. I wasn't here with you. But if you say it was a tail, he said, they're going to fucking think you're crazy. He said, I know what you saw. He said, let me talk to the county. He said, and let me handle this. He said, call your father-in-law, get him down here. He said, because just in case anything goes sideways, we can get you guys, you guys can get a lawyer. I don't know what is going to be said. He said, but I have a feeling of what you saw. I have a sneaky feeling of what you saw. And Kyle's like, what the fuck is going on? Like, monsters? Are you saying monsters? Like, I didn't know bears could have tails. And he said when my father-in-law got here, he was just in utter shock. He saw both kids. Medical examiner had just gotten there. Secured the bodies, and the trooper was talking to the county medical examiner and the responding deputies, and you could see him looking over at him and his wife, and like we had done it. That's what he was thinking in his head. Kyle was like, they think we did it. In my head, I'm thinking, here, we're going to get in trouble for this. He said, but I didn't give a shit at that time. He said, a big part of me just wanted not to even be right there. I just wanted to try and figure out how to turn the clock back around. Yeah, we were taken to county sheriff's department, and very briefly questioned, and we were brought home. My father-in-law brought us all both home. My wife ended up staying at their house for a couple of days. He said I stayed home at my house, our house. It was a really hard time for both of them. He said about a week goes by and we're both kind of summoned to the county. He said the chief medical examiner was there. The sheriff himself was there. The two responding deputies, he said, and the two state troopers. And they pretty much said to both parents, Sadie and Kyle, that we know what happened to your kid and your brother. But we think for calmness and public eye, we're going to make a kind of fabricate a story that, your daughter and your brother had walked down like 1,000 times before, and she must have fallen in the water. He went in after her and they both drowned. That's going to be the statement made to the public. We obviously know there was no way that you could have done what happened to your little brother. It was impossible and you could also see there were canine teeth involved on his neck, but there was two medical reports, death certificates or whatever. One stated blunt force trauma to the daughter, to the back of her skull. Her ankle had been dislocated. There was a large kind of bruise on her ankle where it was dislocated, and then this thing dragged her. But for public eye and all that, we're going to have to say, we're going to have to get creative here, and we hope you understand. So the announcement was made. Niece and uncle, young niece, young uncle, both drowned. Made it like nothing had occurred out of the ordinary. Sadie had actually stayed at her parents for a couple of months. Everything kind of almost fell apart for both of them. And she was at her parents for a couple of months. And then during that time of her and him living, they were talking and seeing each other. She just couldn't go back home. She had found out that she was a couple of months pregnant. And they both said it, that if she had not found out at that point that she was pregnant with another child, that they might not be together still to this day. And it's only been through talking with certain people that are aware that these creatures exist. The state trooper gentleman that helped figure everything out. They talk with him, and eventually they never forgot what happened, but they had to move on mentally for the sake and memory of their daughter and brother. And if you lived in that region, Bryson City and Witter, you would have heard this without an issue. Eventually, they both came to the agreement that they ended up selling the property and home. And moving away from that area. But it just, I don't know how, I can't imagine how, they didn't ever get over it. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell, they actually had 3 kids after and have a beautiful family now. Have 2 grandkids, young grandkids. But they have no idea how it's just strength, you know what I mean? It's strength. And Sadie said that her relationship with God and Jesus and prayer is probably the biggest thing that kept her sane throughout this whole thing. Same goes for Kyle. They just, they had to move on, especially after their son was born. And then they had two little girls, and the youngest little girl reminded them so much of their first daughter, Krista. But like I said, in 1981, if you lived in and around that region, about probably 100 square miles or whatever, the news would have picked it up, and you would have heard 2 kids drowned in the Okanalofty River. And it was just a freak accident is how it basically was presented to the public. But it's just a sad fucking case, man. And they never saw that creature. He said when he heard Jesse's experience, Sadie heard it first, then she shared it with Kyle. And their question to each other was, why the hell didn't someone come in and hunt that fucking thing down? It was just that kind of irked them and hurt them. But, life has gotten better for both of them, but they'll never forget. 43 years later, they'll never forget what their first daughter looked like. His brother's memory. After that occurred, he cut ties, or his family cut ties with him because they blamed him. It was just a very tragic experience and tragic case, and sad. And my heart goes out to both of them, and I'm so glad that they were able to find the strength and just compassion through Jesus, our Savior, and God, and prayer, and everything else, and friends and family on her side to help them. And then their 3 children eventually afterward. But Kyle will never forget. He carries a picture that they had taken a year prior, because he didn't get a new picture of his daughter and his brother that year together. But he carries that picture. It's folded because it's bigger, regular 5x7 or whatever. They're folded in his wallet. For 40 years, he's kept that picture in his wallet. And periodically he takes it out when he thinks about, because he still thinks about it. So she does as well. But I mean, how could you not? So, and there you have it, folks. My heart and prayers go out to both Kyle and Sadie. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go. Please, everyone, just take heed to this experience. I can't even say I hope you enjoyed this experience, because it's not something to enjoy. It's something to take learning keys out of, I guess. And I will thank you for supporting the channel, but I can't say I hope you enjoyed this, because I didn't enjoy hearing it. It was so sad. Because there were parts where both would break down and walk away from, the minute. And, I said, hey, we can stop. But 2 amazing, strong people. 2 amazing, strong people. And their faith is so strong. So, and with that, just stay vigilant. Keep an eye on your children, pets, family, and friends. Why? Because these creatures are real and these events have happened. So share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. And just keep an eye on your kids. They're too precious. God bless you all.